Said to do that in the lab guide, but that helps to expose this brachial plexus. And you have to work through your way through fat and fascia like usual, bluntly dissect, get all these nerves out. Now, you notice, first of all, the subscapular, or the suprascapular nerve running there. So that's sort of like it was in the horse. It's very large here. Then we have a couple of subscapular nerves. There's one and there's one, so we have actually a couple of them there. The subscapular muscle, by the way, has like 2 to 3 different parts, so it's kind of split into different sections there. Then we move here, and since everything is distorted, we're pulling the limb away. What looks cranial here is probably really more caudal to that axillary artery. But you can see definitely we have the axillary nerve running right there. That big one there is all axillary nerve, and that's dipping down between the teres major, which is all that, and the subscapular arch, just like it did in a horse. And then the radial nerve, in this instance, is right here. It looks cranial to the axillary artery, but it would really be more caudal to it. And it almost looks like it's coming off in this individual with the axillary nerve. They look like they're kind of traveling together there. This little nerve that you see now, right there, that is a thoracodorsal. That's going to the latissimus dorsi. Now, as we look more carefully here at a very large nerve close to the axillary artery, that is really the combined musculocutaneous and median and ulnar. The median and ulnar run together, and then the musculocutaneous forms an ansa, which we're going to get another angle here, a little better angle, but maybe we can see it from this angle too. That's the ansa axillaris, that's the musculocutaneous, joining the median and ulnar what are running together. So, and then we can also see some craniopectoral nerves coming off cranially here. They're forming also a loop, but they're going to be going to the superficial pectoral muscles. And then the long thoracic nerve, you can see running right here to the serratus ventralis, just like it did in the horse. And you can see the lateral thoracic nerve. Did we ever find that? I don't know. We found it earlier, I think. So it was going to the cutaneous trunci muscle. Well, I guess we still have parts of it there. So you can see the lateral thoracic nerve. Now open the pleural cavity up. This is sort of the first thing you see when you get everything, all those other ribs removed. And the most prominent thing that really jumps out at you is the azygous vein on this side. And you can see there's a left, and actually there's a right one. We'll see a right one on the other side. So there are actually 2 azygous veins in the ruminants. So it's a unique feature. You can see where the esophagus should be. It's a little hard to see it at this point. The vagus nerve is really hard to demonstrate at this point. We'll see that a little later when we do a little more work. The aorta you can palpate. You really can't see it yet, but that's aorta right there. The caudal mediastinal lymph nodes are huge. They're peeking out right in this area. The phrenic nerve is running down lower, usually right in that area, going to the diaphragm. Okay, so those are the major structures. Now, thymus, notice there is quite a bit of thymus here. This is a young animal, so we probably will have a patient. Now, we see, we've just looked for the vagal trunks. There's a dorsal vagal trunk. There's the esophagus that it's running over right there. It was hard to see. Yeah, there you go. The ventral vagal is a little hard to demonstrate at this point. And so next we are going to just take a closer look at the heart. First of all, a note. We said that that was the dorsal vagal trunk a moment ago, and that really technically is only would be the left dorsal vagal nerve, and then it'll merge with the right to form the axial vagal trunk. Now we've dissected loose some of these structures here, cranial to the heart. This red structure you're seeing here is actually the left auricle. You see how large that is. It really dominates. The right auricle doesn't protrude as much as it did in the horse on the left side, but that is it there. It's actually kind of blue. But now we're looking at, first of all, the pulmonary trunk. See how that's coming up right there. And then the aorta, the arch of the aorta is right there. And then the connecting piece now has been dissected out, the connection, and that is the ligament of arteriosus. It may be patent at this point, but it's, because this is a young animal, but it's probably more ligamentous. Now we can also find the recurrent laryngeal nerve curving around the aorta. We have the vagus nerve coming in here. And then you see somewhere, it was there a minute ago, there's the recurrent laryngeal. Right. Whoops, wait a minute. That recurrent laryngeal, it isn't as obvious as it was a moment ago, so a moment ago it was in there, so it may have gotten torn as we were trying to find these other structures. So, alrighty, that concludes this session. So we are now starting another session here, and we're on the abdominal cavity now. We're basically looking at these major lumbar nerves, and T13. And T13 you can see right there. Let's see the last rib. Can we see that? The last rib is right there. So you see T13 running. It's supposed to run under L1, kind of, I guess, and that's L1, which is kind of a stub compared to the others, the transverse process, that is. And then L2, nerve L2, you see right there, and that runs, or excuse me, L1 runs under the transverse process of L2, and then L2 is running under the transverse process of L4, which is there. And then the L3 and 4 are running together right at this point. As we look just a general, we're looking at the viscera now, and you can see the left longitudinal groove right down there, and you see the superficial leaf of the greater omentum coming off of that. On the other side, you can see then now we have the attachment. Now we have this, first of all, the supraomental recess, which is all of that, and you see all the jejunum and everything inside that. And now we have the superficial leaf coming around it below, and then the deep leaf is on the other side, which came from the right longitudinal groove, and together then they're attaching up here near the duodenum. The bursa then would be between those two leaves. Several things now, we've just sort of isolated things a little bit. First of all, focusing on the duodenum, you see the descending duodenum, and then we have the caudal flexure right here. And then if you just kind of pull everything away and you go in there, it isn't too far until you get to the duodenal jejunal flexure, because everything takes a right angle turn there and goes down. So we ligated that. And then we can also see some things here. We can see the entire proximal ansa, this huge thing right here on the right side. You see it's making like a bunch of loops there. You have some people like to say there's a proximal gyrus, proximal gyrus and a middle gyrus there, and then a distal gyrus there of the ansa. And then the distal ansa is all of that stuff in there. It has a dorsal limb and a ventral limb, and the ventral limb is the one that's continuous to the transverse. We haven't really isolated that from the fat yet at this point. The cecum is down here, kind of all that stuff down there, and that's what the proximal ansa comes out of. Now is to just kind of reach into the supraomental recess and pull out all this jejunal mass here. And you see there is that ansa spiralis, which is all that spiraling stuff there, is the ascending colon. And then there's centrifugal loops that are actually fat embedded here right on top of the jejunum. That is the last part of the centrifugal coils, part of the ansa. That fat embedded stuff you're seeing in the goat. Yeah, only in the goat. In ruminants or bovine and sheep, it's not really that way. And then we've isolated the jejunum, and we have now found the cecum, and we've located the ileocecal fold, which is a massive, again, fat field here in this goat. And then you can see the ileum. You just follow along there. That's ileum going into the cecum at that point. Now we look at the jejunum, and we're looking at some mesenteric lymph nodes. They're very elongated. You have to dig through the fat to really see those, but there you can see one of those. They're pretty close to the intestinal mass, but they are very elongated. A quick look at the spiral colon, or the ansa spiralis. And basically, first of all, we have coming out of that proximal ansa, we have the first part of this, which is the centrifugal. That's called the centrifugal coil heading down there, and there's going to be a centripetal. Sorry, that would be centripetal toward the center. Centripetal part is the first part, and then we have about roughly in the goat 3 turns, roughly. I think it's more like 2.5 maybe in the bovine. And then eventually you're going to come to something called the central flexure. And the central flexure should have the convex part facing cranially and the concave part. Now it looks kind of weird here because we have it pulled out to the side, but if you put it back in position. And then moving out of that central flexor, you have the centrifugal part of those coils, and they just keep winding around. And then eventually you have the centrifugal coils running up there, and then they were that fat embedded mass right there. And then they're going to go into the distal ANSA, which ends up being right here. And the distal ANSA does have a proximal loop here, and a distal, or a gyrus, I guess it's called a proximal gyrus, and a distal